Now on Mississippi Insight. Governor Tate Reeves signs a sweeping tax overhaul bill into law, but not everyone is celebrating. House Democratic leader Robert Johnson joins us to voice his concerns, and a court takeover of Hinds County Detention Center is just around the corner. The Marshall Project Daja Hendry explains what's next this week on Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown on broadcast and on podcast. Thank you for joining us for this March 30th edition of Insight. Eliminating Mississippi's personal income tax has been a talking point for Tate Reeves for many years. Thursday, he finally made it a reality. House Bill 1 passed earlier this session with the major goal being the elimination of the state income tax. The bill does not include everything the House wanted, but it retains the elimination of the state income tax as a non-negotiable element. The bill also reduces the grocery tax from 7% to 5%, and it raises the gas tax by a total of 9 cents over 3 years.
The elimination of the income tax is not just a win for our economy. It's a win for freedom, a win for families, a win for the idea that Mississippi can lead and that we will lead in the century to come. And I believe with all my heart that we will look back on this day as a turning point, a generational victory, and a proud legacy we leave for those who come after us. Now, for the reason y'all are all here, I will now sign this historic piece of legislation that will eliminate Mississippi's income tax once and for all.
To get the bill to the governor's desk, the House agreed to changes made by the Mississippi Senate to their tax reform bill. But a typo in the trigger language of the bill could accelerate the state's shift into tax cut mode. Our next guest has some big concerns about that. Representative Robert Johnson III of Natchez leads the Democratic minority in the House. Robert Johnson, welcome back to Mississippi Insight.
Thank you for having me.
You've been very vocal about concerns with House Bill 1. Can you explain the typo on the trigger language and what that means and what it means moving forward?
Yes. So originally the Senate put a trigger in that said that we could not make any income tax cuts unless we got to 85% of our surplus, which would amount to $400 million. The typo is that it doesn't say 85% of our surplus, which, you know, that you have to grow to get to that point. Right now it says 0.85%, which is less than 1%, which is where we are right now. And the bill is not permissive language. It's shall. You shall make those cuts. And that goes into effect July 1st. Now the cuts won't start July 1st, but it could start as early as January. Now we're talking about $2.2 billion on top of the $596 million we already have implemented in the 22 tax cuts. So those are enormous hits to our budget. A budget that's only $7 billion by itself, and along with everything you see coming out of Washington, it gives us great concern.
And so the governor signs the bill, and so it's what, sign it now and fix the issues later? Is that kind of the mentality?
Well, that's what the governor says, but later could be too late. It could be too late. We could have cuts going, we could have people losing their jobs, we could have services not being delivered by agencies if they actually comply with the law. Now, the governor's office in the state of Mississippi has a way of pushing things off, ignoring the law. You know, we fund projects, and sometimes people don't get the money out of those agencies until November or December. So I'm sure that there's going to be some foot dragging in terms of implementing the law. But the law actually says it shall go into effect July 1st.
With the cuts happening in Washington, what impact will that have on the cuts that we're looking at here in Mississippi?
No, they'll be devastating. You know, I talk about our budget being $7 billion. But people don't realize 47% of the money that funds that budget comes from the federal government. 50% of our education budget comes from the federal government. 60 or 65% of our transportation budget comes from the federal government. And 85 to 90% of our Medicaid budget comes from the federal government. Our Medicaid budget is $8 billion. If they're talking about $880 billion being cut out of Medicaid, that could amount to our Medicaid budget being reduced just about in half.
Republicans argue that eliminating the income tax will boost the economic growth. What do you think about the argument?
It doesn't. It falls on its face. The median income in Mississippi is about $43,000 a year. So the average Mississippian will realize about a $932 savings. Most of them spend that in 1 month of groceries. So my point is that if you really wanted to help people, You wouldn't increase the gas tax, that's 9 cents. You only reduce the grocery tax by what, 3 or 4 cents. And so you have a net gain in your consumer tax. And then you're increasing sales tax on consumer goods by another penny. So actually, the most regressive tax we have in this state overall has been increased monumentally. And then you think about the fact there's no real mass transit in this state. So people really rely on highways and gas, and spending that kind of money extra on gas is a big burden on poor people who are barely making it.
Reducing the grocery tax from 7% to 5%, what impact do you think that will have on people?
Very little, very little. Especially when you consider that on all other consumer goods, cleaning products, paper products, school supplies, all those things, Mississippi spends more per capita on consumer goods than any other state in the nation. Not because we spend more money, but because we make less money, we have to spend more of it on things we have to buy. And increasing the tax on people with gas and consumer products is a great burden, and it's a little bit disingenuous to say you're saving people money. Actually, all you're doing is saving people who are in the top 1% are really going to see the savings.
MDOT said they wanted more money for roads and bridges. Will that 9 cents help with that effort by MDOT?
Well, it would help, but this other tax cut is really going to wipe that out. Think about it. If you cut $2 billion out of your budget, you understand some of that money you're cutting out of your budget is going to come from the existing transportation fund, and you adding another $250, $300 million, that's going to be eaten up. So it's going to be a net loss, in my opinion, for transportation.
The governor and the Republicans have said that this is a major win for taxpayers. What alternative tax policy solutions would Democrats have supported instead? Well,
one of the things Democrats should have done in the areas that are represented by Democrats, along the river, in the Delta, and all those places, we've been grossly underfunded. In counties that are majority black, in the last 5 years, we spent 70% of our budget on infrastructure and economic development. In majority white counties, majority black counties, 30% of that. I mean, we could have come to the table and said, we want to set aside a certain amount of money, say $500 million, to do economic development, infrastructure, catch up in those areas. We probably could have talked about supporting something. But the other thing we would have done, and I was on a tax study committee commissioned by Governor Barber, there are a lot of tax exemptions, over $1 billion, close to $1.5 billion in exemptions we give to corporations and other people that a lot of them don't even need anymore. And so you could have had a trade-off. You could have worked in having a neutral tax cut, which we've done. I actually helped author and supported that 2 or 3 years ago. We didn't pass it, but we found a way to collect that money. But the other kind of tax cut we could have done, people are burdened by the cost of car tags. We could have cut, the price of car tags, gave people some relief on that. There are a lot of things we could have done, and done car tax and grocery tax would have been a tax cut that we all could have gotten by.
Democrats have sounded the alarm over some changes to PERS and adding a 401k style plan to the plan. How do you think this will impact workers in the future?
I think it'll be terrible. Look, we have a hard enough time getting state workers now because we don't pay them enough. But the one thing that we're able to do is offer benefits that other private corporations or private entities don't offer. That's how we're able to keep teachers and other state employees. But, the Republicans touted the last election cycle that they had cut over 2,000 state jobs. Well, the retirement system says, well, you're cutting those jobs. Those are people paying into the retirement system. Now we have more people receiving money. We are paying into the retirement system. And so Republicans said, well, we're reducing the size of government. That's not true. Those people, those services didn't go away. They just contracted out with their buddies in some private entity. The same people who were working for the state are now working for these entities without the same benefits and without the same retirement plan. What we need to do is take those agencies, prisons, child support, let's put them back under state control. Put those people back to work. Fortify our retirement system by putting those 2,000 people back on the state payroll. Don't waste the money on private contracts. Let the state do its job and put those people back to work.
So by paying for private contracts, are we saving any money, or are we
spending
the same amount of money?
No, we are not saving any money. We're not saving any money anywhere. I've been in the legislature for 30 years. I've watched the budgets, and the money that you think you're saving, you don't save it on prisons. You don't save it on services that are privatized. None of it. You're paying the same amount of money, and people have the benefits are not as good for the people you employ.
So you're just shifting money around?
You're just shifting money around.
And so what's the plan? What's the alternative to all that?
The alternative is to put people back to work, and let's go back to providing the services that people send us up here to provide. They don't send us up here to figure out a way to enrich somebody's private friend. What they send us up here to do is provide good public safety, good public roads and bridges, good public and adequate public education, and public health where everybody has access to doctors, hospital rooms, and emergency rooms.
Looking ahead, what do you believe will be the most immediate and long-term effects of this tax overhaul on Mississippi's budget and public services?
Well, the most immediate impact always, when you make these kind of cuts, your biggest budget is what is hit first. Public education is our largest budget, and healthcare is our next largest budget. Those will be drastically reduced. Our schools are going to suffer, and our hospitals and our health departments are going to suffer.
Getting close to the session, any other bills that you're watching before the end of the session?
I'm just spending all my time looking at these bills that we got in front of us. One thing that did come to my attention that we want to address before we leave here, this work program where we take inmates and give them to sheriffs to put in a work program. What they've done in Rankin County is horrible and abusive in terms of putting those people to work on somebody's private farm. That is something we need to do something about, and I intend to, and the Democratic caucus intends to address that before we leave here.
All right, Robert Johnson, always a pleasure talking to you.
All right, thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back. A federal receiver appears set to take charge of the Hinds County Detention Center. County leaders are suing to limit that receiver's authority. Still, we're seeing the culmination of a decades-long effort to improve conditions at the Raymond facility. Journalist Daja has been following this story. She talked Friday with 12 News' Melanie Christopher.
Daja, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And to explain everything that's going on as a journalist with the Marshall Project, you have really been investigating the criminal institutions and what's going on with that subject here in Mississippi. What led you here?
Well, the Marshall Project, as you mentioned, we are an investigative journalism outlet, and I kind of saw what was going on with the Hinds County receivership and how long it had been going on and how complicated it was, and kind of wanted to get to a place of explaining that to the public on what that means for everyone. So,
well, explain to us what led to the receivership. Most of us have been watching what's been going on. So,
yes, so it's a long and ongoing process. You could even go back to 1994, the day that the jail opened. There were issues with the locks. The locks weren't functioning on the doors. So, from that moment, you could fast forward to 2014, the Department of Justice announced that it was doing an investigation into the detention centers here in Hinds County. And what that investigation found basically was that the county, was violating the rights of people in its custody in the detention centers. There was rampant violence, failing to protect them from harm from each other and also from guards who were using excessive force. People were being held past their court-ordered release dates. And it mentions a number of different findings in there. There's a lot of contraband going into the facility. Yeah. And again, with the doors not locking. And after that point, the DOJ announced its findings, and what followed was pretty typical for what they do with these types of investigations. They sued the county, and that lawsuit went into what's called a consent decree, which is basically a settlement between the county and the federal government, the two parties involved in this litigation, which is a plan that they have to agree on to be able to fix these issues and get the detention center back into compliance with the Constitution, and making sure that the people within it are protected and receive their full constitutional rights. This consent decree, at that point, 2016, almost 10 years ago, kind of reaches an inflection point around the end of 2021, 2022. About 5 years into that agreement, there are these court-appointed monitors that have been going in, and they're monitoring and documenting the progress towards
or the non-progress
or the lack of progress, and that's what really gets this receivership piece put into place. In 2021, there were 7 people who died within the facility. One of those people was Michael Richardson, and he was killed in the facility. So he was beaten, stomped, and they were like kind of left him there, and his body wasn't discovered for at least 8 hours. And so that kind of speaks to some of the central issues of this receivership and of this consent decree, was that there's a problem with violence, there's a problem with the staffing in the facility, that that someone could die and not
Be found for 8 hours?
not be found, or not even have anyone to intervene before it got to that point. And so his death was one of the 7 in 2021. In about a 3 or 4 month period, there were at least like upwards of 70 assaults at the end of 2021 going into 2022. And so the federal judge that's overseeing this, Judge Carlton Reeves, pretty much said that Hinds County is not holding up its end of the bargain. So they're held in contempt of court twice in 2022. And the second time largely refers to the conditions in one of the housing pods. It's considered one of the most dangerous. The conditions in there are just terrible. It's filthy. There were locks
no
still
air
not working.
or no heat. I mean, I think they've
Showers weren't functioning. Lots of violence. The lights didn't work, so people are in the dark for a lot of the time. And so, the judge pretty much had to up the ante and say, like, the next step, which is usually a step of last resort. This is a pretty rare
This receivership.
decision. Yes, the receivership.
That's not common.
Not common. It's happened a dozen times to prisons and jails in U.S. history. So,
12 times, and we are one of them.
yes.
Okay. So where does it go from here? What happens next?
Where we are right now is there was a receiver has been appointed, but he hasn't been able to get in and like do the work that the receivership is in place for, because there was some legal dispute about the scope of how much power he should have. So that was appealed, went to a higher court, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and kicked back to the district court that's been handling it. So now the county, or not the county, the DOJ has submitted a revised plan of like what the receiver can do. And
all right. Well, how does a receivership differ from other judicial interventions, such as court-appointed monitors or whatever?
As I mentioned before, it's pretty much a last resort. There is kind of like Judge Reeves has mentioned in his order that anything further would be like shutting down the jail. But the receiver is different in that it is this separate entity coming in, and they have pretty much decision-making power, guided by the agreement, the consent decree, pretty much saying, for example, if there's an issue with staffing, the receiver can go in and develop hiring practices or training programs and things like that.
Is that the same as a special master? Is that the
receiver,
is a special master even more?
No, I would say the receivership is
okay. Is that the okay? So we are at the top now with that. Biggest challenges that they are facing.
I would say the biggest challenge is that this is a systemic problem. So this has been going on for, the consent decree about almost a decade, but even going back further, as I mentioned, in the 1994, the jail had problems. And so this is an outside party coming in to try to fix something that has many roots and many
Yes, it's
issues.
just going, many issues. Some officials have argued that placing the jail under federal control undermines the local governance and the county's response to receivership and legal avenues they're pursuing. Where does that come into play?
I would say that that's pretty much a typical response. Any entity that's being taken over would have that level of pushback. But the difference with the receiver, I would say, is that you know, the people who are responsible for the jails are elected officials. So it's the sheriff and also the board of supervisors who has the power of the purse. But a receiver coming in is someone who is not beholden to the public. They're not worried about getting reelected. And so that's kind of how it differs in that way, but with that pushback.
What are the most immediate changes that Hinds County citizens can expect to see under the new oversight?
I think it remains to be seen. There's many issues in many different ways. I mean,
so this time span, it could go on for a while.
Yeah, there's no way to definitely put a time on it. I mean, the longest running receivership currently is in California. It started in 2006. Now, granted, California is over their whole prison system, and there's many facilities in California.
Right.
But just to give you an idea, like, there's no definite timeline on this.
Big thanks to Robert Johnson and Daja Henry for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.